also a PhD in planning from my alma mater, North Carolina. He has done work internationally as part of the Foreign Service. He also has worked as an environmental planner for the EPA. And now he does work and lives in Eastern Shore and does a lot of work related to nutrient trading. He currently chairs a trading and offset work group for the Chesapeake Bay program and writes a column, Searching for Common Ground, for the Chestertown Spa and Internet magazine. Let's welcome Mr. Foster. Thank you, Mr. Foster.
Thank you, Sukhali. Is it possible to move this forward just a little bit so that I can see and the others will be seeing? Sure. Sure. Good.
Cool.
I really want to give kudos to Zacoby and to the whole program for providing really a broad perspective. This is not people just talking pro-nutrient trading or anti, but to really try to get a full perspective here. And what I'd really like to be able to do, success for me, is when we walk out the door, if we can continue that discussion on nutrient trading. Can we look at it? Can we see? Is it just black? Is it just white? Is it some shades of gray in between? I'm going to have some handouts here, ways to contact, ways to continue that discussion. A paper I did a year ago that's meant really for a general lay audience on this. I'd like to start with what I think may have been one of the first trading examples. I joined EPA in 1974, and at that very time, they started looking at a case. This was actually an emission trading, air emission trading under the Clean Air Act, and it was in Pennsylvania. And background for this was that Western Pennsylvania, as you may know at that time, steel mills had closed, a lot of unemployment, very depressed, and they had been lobbying internationally, trying to get investment into that area. And lo and behold, Volkswagen decided they were going to put a plant, good jobs, with good wages, in somewhere in the U.S., and it turned out after an intensive competition, Western Pennsylvania won. But before they could cut that ribbon and open the plant, EPA stepped in. Not so fast. This area is non-attainment for ozone. And ozone is very serious. Serious health effects, particularly for asthmatics. And a precursor to that ozone are hydrocarbon emissions and nitrogen oxides and sunlight. And this automobile plant, even with the best available control technologies, each time you painted one of those automobiles, some of the hydrocarbon emissions were going to escape. And so the initial response, EPA said, we hate to do this, but we cannot allow you to build that plant. We know there are going to be thousands of jobs. We know you've got the roads, the railways, the trains, workers. We can't let you do it because there's going to be an increase in emissions. And they thought, and they came back and said, well, suppose we can assure that there's not a net increase in emissions. And the EPA kind of scratched their heads, said, all right, talk to us. Tell us what you're thinking here. And what they came up with was a way to reduce hydrocarbon sources throughout that area by enough to compensate for that increase that inevitably was going to come out from those automobile plants. And I want to emphasize, again, the hydrocarbons in themselves were not threatening health. They were a precursor to the ozone. So we were not talking about affecting the health of people in the immediate vicinity of that plant. The winds tend to move to the east. It really was the ozone that would affect people downstream. But by assuring that they were going to reduce other sources, and in this case, Pennsylvania changed the asphalt paving system so that it would reduce the hydrocarbon emissions. It's interesting because that was a non-point source. Those were emissions that were not coming out of a pipe that they reduced, and they were able to measure those, and they were able to do it in a fashion that allowed them to offset those increases from that automobile plant. I'm going to, before I jump into nutrient trading on the Bay, Just make a personal comment here, and Jacoby mentioned that I was in the Foreign Service. I worked overseas in some of the world's poorest countries for about 20 years. And as you can imagine, it made quite an impression on me. I certainly, and I think most of these items you won't see as controversial, that community engagement and trust and transparency are absolutely critical in anything we do. That one size does not fit all. That you have to tailor things, particularly in a state like Maryland that's, you know, it's America in miniature, from mountains to coastal to Piedmont in between. That second one that I think sometimes is forgotten, that waste and inefficiency inevitably hurts the poor. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say if you have an efficient government, that's going to help the poor. But in every country I visited, I found that waste and inefficiency did hurt the poor. Now, think about it just a moment in your own community. Some communities are great at helping the poor, some at addressing potholes. Some do both. But if they don't have the resources, they're not going to do both. And in my experience, it's the poor that lose out. All that is a shorthand for saying that we all have a stake, and environmental justice has a stake in reducing that waste and inefficiency and getting the biggest bang for our buck if we can achieve equivalent environmental impacts. And I'm having trouble with our, let's see. I can wing it if I have to, but here we go. Let me go on as to what, in my view, nutrient trading is not. And you're going to notice here sometimes I'll have something in yellow and most of them in white. The ones in white are ones that I feel we have general agreement on. Okay? It's not a panacea. It's not a substitute for regulations. It's not appropriate for every pollutant, particularly in areas where toxic substance, hotspots are involved, or where reliable measurement is impractical. And this is an opinion, but it's an opinion shared by EPA, and where properly regulated, it's not illegal. It must not become an opportunity to relax controls or industry or wastewater treatment plants. Nothing I say here, I hope, is interpreted as supporting those things. And I think we have to be careful. Sometimes that word trade conveys in our mind trade-off. Oh, yeah, it's going to hurt the environment for those people or over here or over there, but we're going to get more money. That would be a trade-off, and that's not what I'm talking about, okay? Everything I'm talking about is something where we believe you're going to get equivalent or better environmental results at less cost, fewer resources. And I think it's important to understand that under Maryland's regulations or policies, which are still evolving, no trades are allowed except where a community achieves at least two goals. One, that they achieve and maintain local water quality standards in that immediate area of that community. And the second is that they fulfill their share of the requirements for helping achieve Baywide water quality standards. Again, the whole way this process works is recognizing that we all contribute to the poor water quality in the Bay. It's not one community or another. So each community must achieve both these goals. And again, nutrient trading really is a tool, not unlike a car, the internet, or even a fishing net. And as such, it potentially could be used for good or ill. I will have failed in my mission if somebody comes out and says nutrient trading is good or bad. Okay? It depends on how it's used, how it's employed. It's also a method for targeting resources when used in conjunction with a TMDL. I'm assuming everybody understands what TMDL means. No, okay. It's not, as some people say, too many damn lawyers. It really is not, okay? It's total maximum daily load. And it's interesting, what is new in that system, and really only in 2010 did it actually become applied to the Chesapeake Bay. I happened to start out in EPA in the Air Office we were doing that 30 years before. In other words, it said, not enough just to meet certain standards on each factory, on each power plant, on each automobile, but you had to meet the overall ambient standards. That really is what the TMDL is designed to do. So in the case of Maryland, every county, every factory, every farm, every town has a certain pollution control diet that they have to comply with. And again, what they're controlling, not unlike my situation with hydrocarbons and ozone, is that they're controlling precursors. What we're really concerned about in most of those cases is the anoxia in the bay, the lack of oxygen caused by eutrophication, caused by excess nutrients and sediment. Excess nitrogen, excess phosphorus, basically cause the algae to grow so fast that they consume all of the oxygen. Also an opportunity for communities to achieve equivalent or better environmental quality at less cost, more bang for the buck. And I believe in an opportunity to encourage innovative pollution control techniques. It's an incentive. Creating really, we think of it as some new idea, but not only was I working on this 40 years ago, it's been around long before that, and I'm willing to bet that everyone in this room engages in trading of some fashion. Whether you had cornflakes or Rice Krispies or whatever this morning, you didn't grow the corn, you didn't lay the eggs, you didn't grow the rice. You traded your resources to somebody else who could produce that even more efficiently. Some of us may have even considered trading our kids from time to time. I actually did this. Hired a babysitter. Another thing I did is I traded the financial responsibility for the college education and for the care and feeding of my children to my insurance company in the event that I died. Am I evil in embarking on that kind of a trade? Or was I trying to provide for them more efficiently, more protectively? Now, many of you were all involved in trades. Oops, back up. Ooh, really back up. Okay. This pollution control diet, I believe, is a major step forward for cleaning up the bay. It's not perfect, but many of us know that people have been talking about for 30 years cleaning up the bay. It's only recently that we really began moving forward with this. But the TMDL process, in my opinion, without nutrient trading, is at risk of being grossly inefficient, needlessly forfeiting opportunities for improving the environment and helping the poor. Took a look. I happen to live in Kent County, Maryland, just across the bay from Baltimore. Agriculture contributes 85% of the nitrogen in our area. Now, I'm going to have you look at the budget in just a moment. But I believe, like me, you're going to think, well, we ought to be spending close to 85% of our resources in cleaning up that problem. Well, we spend a lot, or propose to spend a lot. Under this budget, under the TMDL process as currently written, under the one-size-fits-all, we'll spend 78% of our resources on stormwater and only 13% on ag. Now that should raise a question, is are we making the most efficient use of our resources? And here's the distribution problems. Here's the distribution, the distribution of resources we're sending to take on those problems. Why could that be? And the reason really is, and it's important to commit this, or at least to understand, and I've got some graphs here that I'll share with you, is again, not all pollution reductions are created equally. On the left, we have a lot of land-based programs, constructed wetlands, forest buffers, grass buffers, and oysters, that can dramatically reduce the pollution, particularly the nitrogen, and do it at a cost of $2 to $10 a pound. If you go to the right-hand side, If you come in with a retrofit and you're trying to control urban stormwater in a small community, it can cost you $90 to $500 a pop. You're going with jackhammers on that old town, on the streets, on the parking lots, carrying them up. Or you're coming in with street sweepers. An incredible cost. We have in Kent County a requirement under the TMDL for almost 30,000 pounds of nitrogen to be reduced. We have two choices, as you see on the right. We could spend about $500 a pound or $5 a pound. And we've got smart fish and crabs and oysters, but they cannot tell the difference between a reduction achieved at 5 or 500. The costs, I think it's worth it. Excuse me, yes? Okay. The costs are extremely high. And I'm happy to talk with you later, but I believe we all have a responsibility to try to get the biggest bang for our buck. And let's look just a moment. I'm going to skip forward at some of the things that could be done. Okay? We're not talking about allowing factories or wastewater treatment plants or CAFOs to expand for this purpose. We're talking about, rather than having the farmer plow to the edge of his field, having trees or switchgrass or constructed wetlands. Switchgrass. Oysters turn out also to be incredibly effective. And the minimum criteria is that landowner must be in full compliance. The BMP effectiveness must be verified by EPA. BMP must be over and beyond everything else required. And we must be able to monitor it and enforce it and achieve equivalent or better results. And counties involved, and this is an add-in, but I think it's an important one, that any county involved must commit to meaningful engagement with the communities that are affected to disclose the differential impacts. They have a choice between an easy way to take that one-size-fits-all and say ban nutrient trading everywhere because it might be abused somewhere, or the hard way to require better community engagement and transparency, allow trading where it makes sense, and target more resources for the poor. I'd like to continue the dialogue. There's some handouts here with really ways. I'm chair of a trading and offset working group for EPA, and this little graph on the back. And I look forward to talking to you. And if you're not really into teleconferencing or webinars, please just come visit the Eastern Shore. I made that invitation a couple of years ago to Fred Tubman. He hasn't been the same since. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is Professor Rena Steinzor. She is a professor of law at the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law. She's the president of the Center for Progressive Reform, a think tank comprised of 60 leading academics at universities across the country who work to improve public protection of health, consumer and worker safety, and environment. She's published several books, including Mother Earth and Uncle Sam, How Pollution and Hollow Government Hurt Our Kids. She co-authored The People's Agents in the Battle to Protect the American Public, Special Interests, Government, and Threats to Health, Safety, and the Environment. And she's also has a new book coming out, Why Not Jail? Industrial Catastrophes, Corporate Malfeasance, which will be published soon. So, Dr. Steinzor.
I don't have one now.
Oh, you don't have it? Okay. So,
It's a pretty picture, though.
I blinked it. Okay.
I'm not a doctor. I'm very self-conscious about this, too many lawyers, too many damn lawyer things. But I'm a lawyer, and I'm here to help you. I just want you all to know that. Does everybody have a grasp on how trading works on the ground? Okay, so what happens is we set a cap over all the pollution that we can produce in an area. So we want no more than X amount to go into the water. And that's been done through 93 individual total maximum daily loads. That's what a TMDL is. It says for this segment of the Potomac, which is so impaired that it's not healthy enough for its designated use. You can't swim there. You can't boat there. We're going to limit to a certain number the total emissions that we can have, the discharges into the water. And what's different about that than what we had been doing is that up until EPA did this heroic, terrific thing of setting a TMDL, we had been going source by source. So we would come to a sewage treatment plant, we'd say, you can put this much sewage in the water. And, well, why, I mean, it's treated, but it's wastewater from sewage, right? You can put this in. Next sewage treatment plant, you can put this in. We did it one by one, and we never looked at the impact of the whole thing. So if there are 10 sources, and each one is allowed to produce X, 10X can overwhelm the river. And that's what the TMDL is. Now that creates the opportunity for what we were talking about before. It's a very good presentation in terms of the economics of it. I have additional concerns. Of course, we all want to do things as inexpensively as possible. The problem we have, though, is that there are some sources that are not required legally to get a permit and to reduce their pollution. And number one example is non-point runoff from farms. So what the basic goal of a trading program is to lighten up on certain regulated sources, mostly publicly owned treatment works, in exchange for getting reductions at a source that would not otherwise make them. So if a farm plants a cover crop near a stream and prevents manure from washing off its land into the stream, then that is a reduction of a certain amount, and we can lighten up on the sewage treatment plant if it gives the farmer the money to plant the cover crops. That's what the trade is. Trade is a market mechanism. So I pay the farmer to plant the cover crop, and then I get a slightly easier permit. Trading was invented by industry, which wanted to harness market mechanisms. It worked very well with acid rain because all the power plants had monitoring devices right on their plants. We knew exactly how much pollution they were producing. We understood that the pollution they were producing was not going to hurt a local, in total it hurts a lot, but it wasn't going to create a hot spot that would hurt a local community. And the industry embraced it. It made it possible to pass the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, all about politics, and it worked very well. Since then, trading has been all the boom. It's been very popular, and we're talking about doing it in the Bay. I mean, we're not just talking about it. Just as one mention of how serious we are, the Department of Agriculture has given the Chesapeake Bay Foundation $750,000 to implement trading in the Bay. So the Department of Agriculture is farmers. I would suggest to you that the reason they did that is because they think that if farmers are participating in trading, they will be under less pressure to reduce their pollution in other ways. Of course, what we really need to do is amend the Clean Water Act, but I don't think John Boehner would be very enthusiastic about that. So, what are the concerns, the environmental justice concerns in this program? First of all, we need a very firm cap, no fiddling around. So we need a TMDL, it needs to be strong. The states need to do what they say they're going to do with those watershed implementation plans. Set that aside as a big question for all of us, whether they're actually going to deliver. And then we need to make sure that when we allow a trade, the local impacts are not damaging to a community. So, if we were to trade, for example, and allow the Baltimore Harbor to become even more loaded with nutrients, then we could end up hurting subsistence fishermen who use the harbor for food for their families. I mean, this is very important. It's not a sport fish or, we have this one Sunday during the summer. These are people that use it to put food on the plate for their families every day. And finally, we must be very careful that someone remains on the hook for the trading success. And that is another serious problem, because in some of these proposals, the sewage treatment plant that paid the farmer to plant the cover crop would be basically could walk away happy whether or not the farmer ever planted those crops. And that would be a very bad result. I mean, the sewage treatment plant should be in violation of its permit if the farmer doesn't plant the crops. Somebody has to be responsible for this. We can't have a sort of a system that is pie in the sky and mess on the ground. Trading is being pushed very heavily. It's far from clear to me that the farmers are going to play. I'm very, very interested in this. Their basic attitude is, leave me alone. I'm not covered by the law. I'm aggravated about all sorts of things that you have done, and I just don't even want to talk to you tree huggers. Go wash that blouse. It has moss all over it. So we have this, hostile attitude, so it's not clear they're going to play. But if they do, if the farmers play, it's very, very important from an environmental justice perspective that all those protections that I talked about are very firmly in place. The story about Pennsylvania is a terrific one. I could not support more the idea that you would allow a factory to be built by trading off asphalt if we're sure that the air is at an acceptably healthy level. But getting all those steps completed in the Chesapeake Bay is going to be pretty hard, as I'm sure the Pennsylvania thing was too, as great a success story as it is. So thank you. Good timekeeping, excellent.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I maybe have some moss I need to get off my shoulder right now from hugging trees and stuff. So our next speaker is, thank you for that, Professor Steinzel. It's going to be Fred Tutman. And I wanted to save some of your bios since I'm going to cover it. You're the keynote speaker for the day, my esteemed speaker. So I'll hold the good stuff for later. But Fred's going to give more of the community perspective on these issues.
I can think of no benefit to an underserved community for trade. And there are, I must say, I'm actually appalled by the discussion of treating watersheds as though they're marketplaces. It's granted that I live in the Patuxent watershed, and I am not confused about the difference between a marketplace and a special place. They are really two different things. And I do realize that trading does have the support of powerful interests and government, who often tries to accommodate business and other interests. But I have seen no consistent explanation from day to day, from place to place, from situation to situation about exactly how trading will work. As David pointed out, it's something where there's an open dialogue, and it's a dialogue where industry is greatly empowered, and the incentives for industry to participate in trading programs are largely to maximize their profits, like most activity they engage in. I cannot imagine how using terms like net in the connection with conservation, that's an economic expression. And the purpose of trading programs, again, is to generate money opportunities. I do not think conservation opportunities are business opportunities. And I realize that people want a green economy and all of that, but where I live in Prince George's County, which has a variety of non-attainment zones, air, water, you name it, environmental quality declining like it is in many other places. And I cannot imagine it would be a place that would generate very many credits, but I can see lots of opportunities to trade. And there are opportunities ongoing. There are interests already in my watershed that have proposed trades. You know, one that has proposed to reduce the exceedances on the Potomac River so that they can continue to blow their permit, to exceed their permit on the Patuxent River. Whether that will get approved ultimately or not, goodness knows, but it gives you an idea of the type of dialogues that are occurring amongst business and industry about how they can slide their caps in order to create the opportunity to extend pollution, to impose ongoing burdens on communities that will never see benefits from these economic opportunities. I don't see anybody proposing to reinvest these funds to make these places that are currently dealing with the burden of excess pollution better places to live. That the benefits actually, and the essence of a trade, is to pollute here and confer the benefit elsewhere. And I think people overlook that because of the dialogue, right? It's all in flux, and so you really cannot pin it down. The devil's always in the details, and I've seen many different models for how a trade might be done, some more onerous than others, some less. So the mere term trade, let's call it a term of art. Trade means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's easy to baffle folks about the idea of a good trade, as though somehow if there is such a thing of a good trade, that somehow applies to all trades. These are very speculative opportunities at best. In some cases, the benefits occur in modeling, not in on the ground. I think we should be watching discharge pipes, and we should be looking at the water quality, not at spreadsheets, you know, right? The folks who back this, and grant you, there are many who are I won't say they're in business with big industry, but they hope to get the willing participation of industry to fund the stuff that they want funded. Restoration programs, incentive opportunities that, granted, I think those are laudable things, but we're really talking not about laudable interests, right? These are corporations, in some cases, that already impose dreadful burdens on subject communities. Communities subjected to intolerable loads and burdens. I also believe that there is a spiritual value to these resources. Water in its own way, I think, is rather sacred. I mean, this coming from a Pisces. It is a public trust resource, not one that we should be conferring the opportunity for folks to trade them, because that encourages the idea that they're fungible. And every time I've gone to a zoning hearing meeting or a public hearing related to a bad environmental project, what I hear from the business community is, give me a number. How much for the wetlands, buddy? You know, and I don't want to give rise to an opportunity for business, industry, or government to enter into contracts, whether these are private contracts or publicly sanctioned contracts, that make environmental quality fungible, something you can take elsewhere, put it in your pocket and fold it, and do something else with it. These are public trust resources, and as such, they are not subject to trading, because you cannot trade what you will never own. End of story, period. All right? So I am in objection to the entire discussion of trading, regardless of which scientist, which business